And so I'm starting the recording now. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Reverend Joan Van Biesler with Unitarian Universalist Ohio. And our webinar tonight is going to be focusing on issue 1. And we want to welcome Bishara Addison, the Senior Manager for Policy.
Honey, I'm on a webinar.
And Strategic Interviews, and Strategic Initiatives at Towards Employment, which is a workforce development organization in the Cleveland area. And I really want to thank her for being willing to come and speak with all of us tonight. And we are recording this so that we're able to share it with others and share it on our website and Facebook page as well. So, Bishara, I think I will turn it over to you to begin, and we'll start. So we have a good number of minutes left for questions.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining onto this webinar this evening. We truly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Joan, for the introduction. My organization has allowed me to give 50% of my organizational time to the campaign because we know that 50% of our graduates in 2017 have drug possession as their most serious offense and would be eligible for sealing as a result of issue 1 passing. Policy Matters Ohio this week actually came out with a brief on how decriminalizing these sorts of offenses reduces the impact of collateral sanctions, which helps individuals gain employment. So this is definitely an important issue from a workforce development perspective when you look at the intersection of jobs and justice. But obviously issue 1 does way more than just that. And so we're going to spend some time getting into the 4 things that issue 1 will do, and then also talk through what you've been hearing and kind of dispelling some of those myths. Sound good? Good. Take that as a yes. So this is the Safe and Healthy Communities campaign. We really want to focus on neighborhood safety, drug treatment, and rehabilitation. Those are the primary goals of issue 1. Go to the next slide. And so I'll start off with describing who created this particular campaign. This was built by Ohioans and those that have been most directly impacted by the criminal justice system. There are advocates from across the state that have been working on this campaign for almost 3 years. And there were 4 organizations that were really considered the architects of issue 1. The Ohio Organizing Collaborative, which has a statewide presence and chapters all across Ohio. The Ohio Justice and Policy Center, which does work statewide, but is based out of Cincinnati. The Ohio Transformation Fund, which is an intermediary funding organization that has that decided that criminal justice reform was going to be one of their priorities. And then the Alliance for Safety and Justice, which is a national organization that has worked in other communities to decriminalize drug offenses. And the key point person is actually from this area. She used to be in a leadership role at ACLU of Ohio and was very active in criminal justice reform in the greater Cleveland area. So the folks that put this together are Ohioans. And I think just to dispel some of the myths that you're hearing, that, you've got these individuals from, California who are coming in and imposing legislation. That's not the case. This was built by Ohioans, and then support was sought from allies because guess what? Campaigns aren't free, and we did need to raise resources to be able to provide the education and the information out in the community to make sure that people understood what they could be voting on. Go to the next slide. So what is driving the creation of issue 1? So that would be our next point. We know that we want to maintain public safety. We know that individuals, best practice research says that individuals who have addiction as a barrier are not served well in prison, and our prison population is just too high. Right now, our state prisons are at 130% of capacity. That's not safe, and individuals are not going to come out of those institutions in a better situation if they're in overcrowded facilities. And so when we look at those dynamics, how do we address all of those urgently? And that is what really drove the creation of Issue 1. The idea that we might be able to maintain safety, decrease prison population, and then also consider what will Ohio voters vote for. And some polling was done before this was actually put into ballot language to say, what would voters actually be interested in supporting? And we landed on these core issues that Issue 1 addresses. And so let's get into the first thing that Issue 1 will do. So the first is that it will encourage more rehabilitation through earned credit. Ohio actually already has earned credit. So individuals, inmates in prison facilities can already participate in evidence-based programming and earn time off of their sentence. And right now it's about 8%. There are 40 states that offer earned time credit. And Ohio just happens to be one of the stingier of the states. And so Issue 1 will increase earned time credit from 8% to up to 25%. And the key word is up to. So the incentive for individuals who are incarcerated is to participate in evidence-based programming that we know works. I would also say that not everyone is going to be able to earn up to 25% off of their sentence, because not all of our facilities have an equitable amount of programming. But we do know that the programming ODRC, Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, offers is good programming and evidence-based. And we want to encourage individuals to participate in that, because our belief is that if individuals are actively participating, they're going to come out more prepared when they're released from prison. So the next slide. We expect that to impact about 4,800 people who are currently incarcerated who would be eligible to be released early because they participated in prison programming. So that is the first element of Issue 1 where we expect there to be a drop in prison population. Next slide. So the second thing that Issue 1 does, and this is what Issue 1 is probably most known for, is the reclassification of felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses as misdemeanors. The campaign belief is that addiction is a public health issue and is not an issue that should be addressed through the criminal justice system. What it will do is it will prohibit judges for incarcerating someone with a low-level felony, because their felony will then be reclassified as a misdemeanor. Misdemeanors can't be incarcerated. It's also retroactive. It means that individuals who are currently in the community who've completed their sentence but still live with the burden of a felony could petition the court that they were convicted in to have it reclassified. And that also applies to those who are currently incarcerated who might be eligible to have their felony reclassified as a misdemeanor if the F4, F5 is their most serious offense. So if you got some other offenses, Issue 1 may not help you. And this does not apply to trafficking. This only applies to low-level drug possession felonies. Next slide. Oops, I think I've already covered this. So a few key details here. For the first 2 offenses, judges will not be able to use jail, which means that they have to use other sanctions when someone comes before them with an F4, F5 low-level drug possession. They can use electronic monitoring, mandatory drug treatment, some form of community control, house arrest. There's plenty of things that they can do to sanction someone and hold them accountable, but we believe that jail and prison are just not the best options. Next slide. And this will impact about 2,100 people. who won't be in state prison each year for a low-level drug possession offense. So that's the second part of issue 1. The third part of issue 1 is that we believe that violating probation should not result in prison time. Right now, there are a number of ways that you can violate your probation and not commit a new crime. It costs about $27,000 a year to incarcerate someone. And there are several thousand individuals who are currently incarcerated for a non-criminal probation violation. So that does not apply to those who pick up a new case. If you pick up a new case, that's not considered a non-criminal probation violation. But this means that, for instance, there are some cases where a probation violation could be missing a meeting with your probation officer, or you could be in a situation where you are not allowed to associate with known felons. Well, in some communities where there's a high concentration of individuals returning with a criminal conviction, it might be very difficult to actually abide by that, that probation sanction if your community has a high number of returnees. And so sometimes the probation rules are simply unreasonable. Either way, we don't believe that we should be putting individuals in prison for a non-criminal probation violation. So the third thing that issue 1 does is it prohibits a judge from putting someone in prison for a probation violation. Next slide. And we believe that's going to impact about 2,500 people who would be diverted from prison for a non-criminal probation violation. Judges would have to come up with other sanctions to be able to hold people accountable. So that leads me to the last part of issue 1, the fourth part of issue 1. We believe if we were to add all of that up, that around 10,000 people would not be going to prison as a result of the passing of issue 1 each year. That's equivalent to about, let's say, $100 million a year not spent on individuals not going to prison. Policy Matters Ohio actually did a really great report about a month ago saying that the campaign's estimates were actually a bit low, and that will actually save closer to $136 million. Issue 1 says that whatever the savings are, 70% of those savings must go to drug treatment and recovery, 15% must go to trauma recovery for underserved crime survivors, and another 15% is flexible but must be used with the spirit and intent of issue 1. All right, next slide. So let's just recap the math. Our current state prison population is about 50,000 individuals, and despite numerous efforts to create criminal justice reform policy, our state prison population has stayed about the same. Keep going. So we know that if we are not sending, 10,000 people to prison each year, that it is going to save us quite a bit of money. And we expect that not to just happen, let's say, 1 year. It's going to happen multiple years that we will save that amount of money. And this is also a conservative amount. It actually costs about $73 to incarcerate someone per day. And most individuals who are in state prisons are in prison for a year or more. And just an important distinction between prison and jail. Jails, you can incarcerate someone for a misdemeanor for less than a year, and prison incarcerates those who are who have a felony, and it's usually more than a year. Important distinction because they have different oversight, and that terminology has been kind of intertwined through this campaign. A lot of the opposition is saying that a judge can't incarcerate someone or hold someone accountable when they actually do have the threat of jail, which is distinct from prison. And so when I brought up this issue around $73 a day to incarcerate someone, we used much lower numbers because we know that there are fixed costs as it relates to maintaining a prison facility. And so we came up with our numbers in a conservative way because we know that there are fixed costs and overhead that won't be reduced just because someone's not incarcerated. Next slide. So 10,000 people is actually about 20% of our prison population. It doesn't actually address totally the overcrowding, because overcrowding right now we're at 130% of capacity, but it definitely is a significant reduction. And our state prison budget is $1.3 billion. And so 130 million, if we were to use the Policy Matters Ohio estimates, is about 10% of the state prison budget. So here comes some of the other questions. Why put it in the Constitution? It's a very controversial issue because once it's in the Constitution, it's very hard to change. We were able to get this amendment on the ballot because we crafted language. Over 700,000 signatures were collected. 700,000. And nearly 400,000 of those signatures were valid. It's really difficult to do that, and they collected signatures from all 44 counties. And so to be able to do that, and then, spend money on a campaign to make sure that folks vote on it, that's a lot of work. That's really difficult to do. And so if they wanted to overturn, or if there was a group that wanted to overturn what we've done, they would have to go through the same amount of work, and it would be very difficult to explain. So once it's in the Constitution, it's very difficult to change. But it's not an unusual tool for us to use. We have changed the Ohio Constitution before, actually several times. Most recently, we changed the Ohio Constitution in 2010 to determine casino locations. So our position is if you can change the Ohio Constitution for casinos, we can certainly change the Ohio Constitution to treat addiction as a public health issue. It's just about priorities. Next slide. So the other question is it that serious? Why can't we just try a legislative approach? Most of these reforms individually could be done through legislation, number one. And there are 5 states that have done similar reforms. There are 5 states that have done similar reforms around reclassifying felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses, 3 of which chose a legislative approach. So this can be done through legislation. However, if you see the chart in front of you, there have been a number of attempts to reduce prison population, yet our prison population has remained stable. Part of that has to do with continued efforts to create new criminal convictions and the way folks are charged and processed in our criminal justice system. ACLU did a report in 2017. Over 1,000 bills were introduced to create new criminal convictions. And so there's a constant effort to find new ways to put folks in prison. That's number one. The other piece of this is that we know that there are racial disparities in our criminal justice system and how individuals are charged. We know that between populations, between white and black, we use illicit drugs at about the same rate, but African Americans are charged at 6 times the rate. And so there's a continued effort to find ways to continue putting people in prison. We can debate around whether prison is the right tool, but we can't afford to continue spending thousands of dollars in overcrowded prisons. And so part of the reason why we're putting this in the Constitution is that we know it's very difficult to change. And once it's in place, it'll be very difficult for our General Assembly to try and undermine this effort to reduce prison population and direct resources towards treatment. We also know that this General Assembly does not have an appetite for real criminal justice reform. And so if there was a better way, we would have taken it. But we believe that Ohio voters have a right to decide how we reform our criminal justice system, because it's costing taxpayers a lot of dollars. And also, there are people who are really hurting. In 2015, and it's 2018 now, so there was a 3-year time difference. In 2015, there were 80,000 individuals not in the workforce as a result of the opiate epidemic. But the resources to treat addiction have not followed from our state house. And so we believe that we have to take action now, and we can't wait for our General Assembly to take action. And that's why we're bringing this to the voters. Next slide. So I do want to spend some time taking questions. I'm sure you have many. If you're interested in getting involved, you can endorse the campaign. We are always looking for organizational endorsements. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And at least in Cleveland, Rachel Collier, she is an organizer from the Ohio Student Association, OSA, and contracting with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, where she can print lists and help you organize canvases, or put you in touch with an organizer that she works with in your community. Next slide.
And I want to add that the Unitarian Universalist Association and UU Justice Ohio are definitely endorsers as supporters, strong supporters of Issue 1. And you are able to sign up on the UUA website. There's an entire page now devoted to this. You can contact any of the UU congregations in Cleveland, because they're all involved in a program that the UUA is endorsing to do canvassing and get out the vote work and education around Issue 1. And that's going to focus on the last weekend before the election. So that's November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So you may have read that in the UUJO newsletter, that there will be a concerted effort among Unitarian Universalists to work in Cleveland, and there's a concerted effort to work in Akron to get out the vote, to educate people about Issue 1, and to get them to the polls. We also are collecting a number of reports and editorials and the wonderful reports that Bishara noted. We have them all collected on the UUJO website, which is being updated daily now around Issue 1 and the discussion there, so that you're able to see all of the wonderful research that's going on and responses to some of the more common questions that are there. And then check out our Facebook page, the UUJO Facebook page, because we are constantly updating that one as well. So look, if you are not on the UUJO website, or if you're not getting the newsletter, you can just go on uujo.org and ask for it, and we'll be happy to help you out with that. Thank you.
All right. So I imagine that there are a ton of questions, because I'm sure you've seen all kinds of ads. I'm sure you've seen newspapers that say vote no on Issue 1 and give a number of reasons for that. So I'd like to be able to take some of your questions and offer the campaign's response to some of these concerns.
I've unmuted you guys, or you can unmute yourself, and that way you can ask some of these questions.
Hi, Bishara. This is Rena Shear. I am up in Cleveland, Ohio, working on Issue 1. Just driving home from work today, I heard on NPR there was some interview where people who are not in favor of Issue 1 were making the argument that it was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for the courts to have to look at this going from a felony to a misdemeanor. And I just wonder how credible that argument is.
So I don't believe it's especially credible, but I want to offer a couple of things. So the first thing is, other states have done similar reforms, most notably where the research has been done, because these changes have been recent in other states, as in California. where they really did see a cost savings by reducing prison population. So the state saved in the first year like $68 million from their state prison budget. And I don't think that we expect to see that just in the first year of releasing individuals who would be eligible under issue 1. So we know that in other states, it's possible to see cost savings. We also know that in those states, there was not a rise in crime. And so releasing folks early didn't actually result in a rise in crime. And we did see a greater use of drug courts. So I think this issue that you're probably hearing on NPR has a lot to do with a belief that there could be a reduced need for specialized dockets like drug courts, and that more and more individuals will be seen at the municipal level. And some of that is true, because felonies are heard at the common pleas level, and then misdemeanors are heard in, the hearings are in municipal courts. There are municipal drug courts. They probably will need to expand, and in states that have done these reforms, they actually saw a greater need for drug courts. And there's a couple things that can be done, which is why we have to stay vigilant and stay involved in this campaign to make sure that issue 1 is implemented properly when it passes, because right now we're pulling ahead. There are practices and laws that can be changed where common pleas courts could hear misdemeanor level charges around drug possession. So that's the first thing. So we don't have to reduce the existence of these specialized dockets. We just might need some additional policy to be able to make that happen. Also, in the spirit of issue 1, we know that the savings could go towards supporting some of these specialized dockets at the municipal level. They would be eligible to compete for some of these cost-saving dollars. And the way that it's written, the 70% cost savings, because whatever the cost savings is, whether it's 68 million, 100 million, 130, 136, regardless of what that number is, 70% will go to the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And they would be responsible for creating an RFP and allowing communities to compete for those dollars based on need. And I would imagine that our drug courts at the municipal level, or the expansion of, or the creation of, would be eligible to compete for those dollars. Also, issue 1 is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It will not solve all the challenges we have in our criminal justice system. And so it actually might create some new work, like additional legislation where we need to be able to make sure that some of these existing specialized dockets at the common pleas level can hear some misdemeanor level cases. We might have to do that, but that's also the right work. We should not pursue a reform because it's going to create some additional work that we have to do to make our criminal justice system more fair and equitable. And that would be the campaign response to that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Bishara, it's Karen in Cleveland. I haven't heard anything in the way of information about the rehab services. Your emphasis, as I understand it, has been mostly on the fairness of the sentencing and the reduction of cost. But what happens, what is the plan for addressing people's issues and helping them to get off the drugs?
So the cost savings, as I was explaining around drug courts potentially being eligible to compete for those dollars, are to be directed towards quality drug treatment. So those same types of programs would be eligible to compete for the cost savings. And the ballot language is clear that 70% of the cost savings have to go towards that purpose. So they can't be used for anything else. 70% of those cost savings that come from the state prison budget. Now, is $100 million enough money to serve the whole state? Absolutely not. We're going to need additional resources, but we already need additional resources. We already don't have enough. And so the goal is to be able to spur investment so that more dollars can be allocated, particularly as we see these dollars flowing back to our communities and better drug treatment seeing drug treatment programs improving because they have more resources, that's going to encourage more investment in more programs. And that's the idea behind issue 1.
So not knowing anything about rehab services and drug treatment, as I don't, you still have not given any specifics about what's involved in that and does it really work? What's the recidivism? I want it to work. I just am so unfamiliar with the promise that you've laid out. I wish that I knew more.
So I know the campaign reviewed countless research to say that quality drug treatment does work to help individuals overcome their addiction. The challenge is that there just aren't enough resources going towards quality drug treatment. The passing of issue 1 will still, the funding for it, the cost savings, will still have to go through a rules process in our General Assembly. They will still have a say, which means we have to stay involved to make sure those resources go to exactly where they need it. Like this isn't, issue 1 won't, when issue 1 passes, we will still have more work to do to make sure that issue 1 is implemented properly. But it sounds like, and I do have some documents that I can send to Joan who can distribute those to the group. It would be helpful if you had some of the research that was reviewed by the campaign citing what some of the quality drug treatment programs are like. And there are plenty of best practices. And so I know that there is a really good FAQ document that the campaign put together. And so right after this webinar, I'll send it along to Joan and I'll make sure that she shares that with you.
And I'll send
Thank
that
you.
out.
That's helpful.
Certainly. Other questions?
Jeff Gamblay here in beautiful Columbus, Ohio. I took your 4,800 number for who we think the nonviolent offenders would be who would be released, and used a number of $30 a day to support them in prison. Well, you said it was someplace between 30 and 40, so I went low. And multiplied that by 365, which would be a year, and that comes out to about $52 million of a potential savings for the with that aspect. Now, of course, there's going to be, as you mentioned, some of the courts may end up spending a little more, and of course, then some of that also money will then be turned into drug education. But you mentioned I believe 68 for California. And I thought, well, let's see what kind of numbers we're talking about in Ohio. And that's just, you know.
That's only one part of issue 1.
Yeah, I know.
And that isn't just for nonviolent offenders. So that is those who have participated in prison programming. So this is a good learning moment. 90% of individuals incarcerated will come home nationally. So whether you like it or not, regardless of their offense, they are coming home. And
right.
So the earned time credit, which that's the 4,800 number, applies to more than just those with drug possession related offenses.
Mm-hmm.
That applies to anyone who is in prison, who is likely to be released back into the community, who's actively participating in evidence-based and rehabilitative programming. That can earn up to 25% off of their sentence. So we were looking at, based on who's there and the programming that they've participated in, who's eligible to be released early. And that's how we came up with the 4,800 number.
Mm-hmm.
So we believe that 4,800 people will not be incarcerated each year or released early as a result of one part of issue 1. Then there's these other 2 parts of issue 1 of just not sending people to prison. So not sending individuals with the drug possession related offenses and not sending people to prison who have non-criminal probation violations. The folks with the non-criminal probation violations, that might be more than just a drug possession related offense. It could be a number of things for a non-criminal probation violation.
Mm-hmm.
So that impacts, those are 3 different groups of people who would be impacted by issue 1, but collectively, those individuals, by not going to prison, will save the state around $100 million a year. And that's conservative. Any other questions?
This is Pam Patch, and I work for Horizon Prison Initiative, and we in the program at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. So I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
Who decides which programming qualifies for reducing your sentence? Is that the ODRC, or who makes those decisions?
I just want to rephrase your question. Who qualifies for the programming in prisons, or who qualifies for, like, who'd be eligible for the cost savings?
Well, who determines, you said that there are certain programs that if they are in those programs that would qualify them to reduce their sentence. But which programs count? Is it every program that's offered, or is it only programs through ODRC, and who makes those decisions?
It's programming that's happening at the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections.
Okay.
So if it's a program that's, and someone's got to be actively participating. So they can't just show up for 5 minutes and that gets counted as them participating.
Okay.
It's active participation, full engagement. So basically for every 2 days of participation, they can earn a day off of their sentence, up to 25%.
Okay.
So I would imagine that because this issue 1 has to be implemented, so there will be like a rules process. ODRC would determine which programming is eligible, but I would imagine any of the programs they've already supported or will support are evidence-based and things that have already gone through a process. So all of the programming already embedded at any of the prisons has been approved by ODRC, and that programming would allow someone to be eligible in terms of the earned time credit.
Okay. Okay. So our program is 10 months. They live in a dorm together and have programming, throughout the day. So they would earn, however many days that would be, because they're in programming throughout that time. For 9 months. Okay.
So that's a really good example of someone earning earned time credit, up to 25%. So they could continue participating. Let's say, they could spend more time, but there's a limit to how much they can earn off of their sentence.
Okay.
And the 25% puts us in line with other states.
Okay.
So it's not like we're making a huge jump for Ohio, but we're not making a huge jump comparatively to what other states offer.
So if I understand it, we're just bringing our program that currently exists up to the level of the other states.
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, I don't think for Horizon they get time off under the current standards. So I don't know who's vision.
Well, right now they can only earn up to 8% off their sentence.
I don't think they get any credit.
So this is a really good advocacy moment for November 7th, so after the election, because we're all going to have to stay on top of how these agencies, so when I think about the agencies, ODRC is one around the earned time credit, the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Attorney General's office, because that's where the 15% for crime survivors would live. Other 15% still has to be decided. And so we're going to have to pay attention to how these decisions are getting made. The great thing is the advocates who are working on this campaign are in it for the long haul. So we are going to hold folks accountable, but that's the kind of feedback we need to make sure that if there is a really strong program happening in prison, that those individuals are eligible for the earned time credit. So that's work that we have to do with ODRC after issue 1 passes. But I think that that's a fight worth fighting for.
Yeah, I would agree. And then the 15% for trauma services, is that for victims of crimes, or is that for people that have committed crimes who are often traumatized?
So the language says crime survivors.
Yeah.
And actually another attachment that I sent to Joan that she can send out is the actual ballot language. So we know that many women incarcerated are also victims of crime.
Mm-hmm.
And so this language is broad enough to include them as well.
Okay. Okay.
And we do have the language, the ballot language, on the UJO website too right now, but I'll also send it out as well.
And please note, what will end up in the Constitution and what you'll see on your November ballot aren't exactly the same thing. This is why it's really important to vote for Secretary of State. We didn't get to decide what the language would be. We submitted language that we wanted to have on the ballot, and it could have been like save bunnies or free all felons, anywhere in between. And they chose some language that is less favorable to our campaign. So it's important for you to see the language that will end up in the Constitution, which is much more accurate, a much more accurate representation of what this is going to be versus what you'll see on the ballot.
We have that on the website too.
Yes.
Right.
You'll notice that they're a little different.
Yeah.
And then if it passes, how would inmates go about applying for to have their felony reduced to a misdemeanor? They need to go through an attorney, or?
So that's another great question. That's a November 7th issue. Theoretically, we know that this ballot language makes it possible for individuals to be released early because they could have their F4, F5 reclassified when they're incarcerated. It is going to require folks in the legal space to go into prisons and make sure that that education is happening. How that is going to happen, I'm not sure yet. I do know there are folks on the campaign who are working on a post-campaign strategy, both for issue 1 passing and also for issue 1 not passing. And that will be part of the conversation on what does it look like to make sure that we are directing our folks who are engaged in care and want to do that education. How do we make sure we get them access? But those logistics have not been worked out yet.
Okay.
Full transparency. Not there yet.
Okay.
People ask me questions and I'm like, that's a November 7th problem. That's a good problem to have, but it's one that we'll have to deal with on November 7th.
Well, I mean, the women I work with, many of them are aware of issue 1 and are encouraging their, families on the outside to vote yes. So I'm sure they will, if it passes, will want to know, well, how do I start applying for that? And when will the earning credits to reduce your the number of days? So there's a lot of mechanics. It doesn't just happen magically. Once it passes, it's not all of a sudden, that today you can start earning more credits toward early release. So my belief is that it's going to take several years to make sure all pieces and parts of issue 1 are implemented with fidelity. Okay. But that is, when we think about our criminal justice system, there's a strong foundation for it staying the same that's been built over a decade and a half, or a century and a half. Yeah. And so we're not going to unwind all of that in 1 year. It is going to take some time. Yeah. That's why we have to stay engaged.
I had a person ask me yesterday about the how much drug material constitutes personal use as versus evidence of trafficking.
Yeah.
So how much do you have to have on you?
That's a complicated answer. Ohio has a drug schedule. So depending on the type of drug and the amount, there's different ways of prosecuting, whether it's a felony or misdemeanor and the type of felony. So depending on the drug, you're going to get a different answer. Usually when folks ask that question, I've noticed, it has to do with some of the opposition claiming that issue 1 would allow folks who have 20 grams of fentanyl to have that felony knocked down to a misdemeanor, and we know that 20 grams of fentanyl is extremely lethal. And so, and there's also this concern that fentanyl laws were changed in Ohio, but after this became, the language was finalized for this ballot initiative. So there's concern that we would struggle to prosecute fentanyl. But the truth is, trafficking of fentanyl will still involve a prison sentence. It's a federal crime. It's also a state level crime. And the prosecution of any drug possession usually has to deal with not just how much you have on you, but the intent. And so there was an attorney that gave an example that there was an individual who was charged with trafficking 10 grams of heroin and aggregated trafficking for possession of a small bag or a small gram of heroin and fentanyl together. That's actually not very much. And alone, those things could have been considered a misdemeanor, but the prosecutor was able to prove intent, that that person was going to use what he had or she had for the purposes of trafficking. And so they were charged with trafficking, and they would not, that individual would not be eligible to have their felony reclassified as a misdemeanor because issue 1 does not apply to trafficking. So what it will do is it will force prosecutors to actually have evidence and prove intent. And right now, there's almost like a laziness, and that it's easier just to charge someone with these lower level offenses so that they can move people through the system faster instead of really proving people guilty. And so what this will do is it will force prosecutors and judges to change their behavior as it relates to prosecuting very serious drugs. But if you're interested in looking at one of the drug schedules, I can also send that link to you.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Okay. For those of you who are going to be in Cleveland, I would urge you to really check out the UJO website or the UUA website, or get in contact with your congregation, because we will be needing folk to help us on November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. UUA President Susan Frederick Gray is coming to help get out the vote as well, and to campaign for issue 1. And she will be preaching at West Shore on that Sunday as well. So you should put that one in your calendar too.
Well, one of my action items is to send an FAQ that we've used for those who are trained as ambassadors. And I think that has some of the research that I think Karen, you were referencing that you would like to see. So I will send that. And I'll also send a link to a drug schedule. It's not, and I actually find the legalese to be a little bit complicated, but what it shows is that drugs are classified in different ways, and prosecutors have an opportunity to look at intent and place charges on people accordingly.
That really helps to clarify. All right. Other questions? Now's the time to ask them, as opposed to 3 o'clock in the morning, because neither Bishara nor I want to get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning to ask a question.
And you also have my email address. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to send me an email.
Exactly. All right. And that's on the slide in front of you, both the email and your cell phone. Thank you, dear, for sharing that. Yes. That's great. Well, then, I think that if those are the questions and the answers that we have right now, I'm going to stop the recording.